Hello, Diana. Thank you so much for joining the Introscope internal communication series that I run on my blog. This is with thought leaders. I ask them, to share their experiences and their practices based on their background. And I've done this with multiple thought leaders from various topics, including communication planning, manager communication, executive presence. So I'm very excited to have you on my show to talk about communication execution. I know this is a very important topic and you've got some experience in it. So very delighted to have you on my show. Before we get started, please could you quickly introduce yourself for our audience?
Thanks for inviting me. That's a really nice experience. We had a chance to work together before a bit, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And yeah, as I said, we worked before, and that was on my side because I'm a co-founder of Inko Club. That's an internal comms community based in the Czech Republic. And our goal here is to bring together professionals from the internal comms area, mostly from the Czech Republic, but we're open to neighboring countries and the rest of the world as well. And what we also want to do is to strengthen the awareness of internal comms as a profession within the business that is here in the Czech Republic mainly, but yeah, in this part of Europe. So that's what I mostly do today. And my experience in internal comms is over 10 years, but in general, in comms and marketing, over 15 years. So I gathered everything that I had, and I'm really happy to share that with others now.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I know you're doing a great job with the Inko Group, and I'm very, happy
Thank
that
you.
you included me, although I'm not part of the European Union as of now. But let me get started by asking you. So, why is communication execution so important? Because a lot of people talk of the strategy, but
Mhm.
and when do you know that you're ready to execute? Because a lot of time goes in planning. So, when is it right to execute?
hmm Well, first of all, communication execution is the essence of the communication process. Like when you can plan anything, but if you don't execute, then what sense does it make, right? It's just, like practice for practice and art for art. So that's actually where all the work, all the planning, all the preparation materializes and like takes shape. And that's where you send it out to the world.
Mhm.
So it's the most important actually thing if you want to have the communication happening. And well, that's why it's important, right? And when are you ready to execute? Well, in an ideal world,
Mhm.
you follow your plan, you gather the input, you shape your message, and you have enough time to test it to find
Right.
out if it works as you want it, and then you publish it, right? That's like what you can do. But we don't live in an ideal world, right? So, um, and I'm not sure actually if I know any comms professional that lives in an ideal world, meaning that they have the comfort to execute according to, what they planned and so on. So, in reality, many of us experience changing expectations, changing deadlines, missing input, like everything just goes not according to the plan. And we have to improvise. We have to decide uh, if we're ready. I would say mostly based on this assessment. Are
Yeah.
we able to make that communication any better, or is it the maximum thing that we can have right here and right now? And of course, we have the deadline. So sometimes it's the deadline that tells you you are ready. You just have to send it out.
Got it.
But I would say that mostly it's about getting as good as you can, having as well prepared communication as you possibly can.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And so, when in your mind, how do you define, communication execution? And then, if you look at the
Mhm.
spectrum of work that you mentioned, is there like should it be 50% planning, 50% execution, or 80/20? How do you kind of evaluate and
Oh,
say?
that's very hard to say. And it really depends on the project, on the situation, on how smoothly the execution goes. But when it comes to defining like what execution is, I would say that's everything in between having a plan
Right.
and getting some first feedback after you send the communication out. And I include that part with the feedback, because feedback loop is, like a part, of communication, and communication is a two-way street. So it's not about pushing the send button. You also have to know how it landed. That's why I include it. And what's also, I guess, important is that there's no clear and sharp kind of like end to planning and start of execution, because you start execution and then you have to come back to the plan, you have to adjust something. So that's very important, and because of that it's really hard to say how much percentage any of those parts takes. And maybe developing on that point, that like you come back to the plan and you go further to execution. First of all, your plan shouldn't be very rigid. If you, it's not like a step-by-step instruction. Like if you have something like this, then it will be very difficult in your life later on, like in executing, because everything changes around. The context might change. You might find out there is some, information that you will never get. Like imagine the change in the organization. There are things that haven't been decided yet. You had it in your wishful thinking plan, but it's not there, right? So you have to adjust, you have to change something, or there's some super urgent thing happening in the company and it has to be communicated first. So you have to put your plan aside and then come back to it and adjust again. So yeah, it's a never-ending story, actually. Like sometimes you have it ready. You're like really waiting for the last approval to press the send button, and someone comes and says, everything changed. And then you start from the beginning.
Oh, this is great, valid. I mean, extremely. In fact, that is interesting, because I wanted to ask you the next question, which is related to that, because you mentioned about flexibility. So
Yes.
what are some of the other aspects of communication execution?
Yeah, I think we hear each other now.
Yeah. So did you hear my question, or do you want me to?
If you could repeat the question, that would be better.
What I was talking about, you mentioned about flexibility in executing communication. So what other elements or aspects of communication execution are there, according to you?
Mm-hmm. Well, after you plan to some extent, right? Let's have it like this. Then you have the part where you reach out to your stakeholders, you gather the inputs, like as detailed as you need or you can have, right? You work with it to shape the message for all chosen channels that you have in your plan. Then so it might be, like that you just sit and write, right? Then you have to produce the content for those channels. So you might need some graphics, or like depending on what that is, right? So you actually produce everything. Or if you have a town hall or something like that, then you might be helping speakers to prepare. So that's what gets into it. Then I would say testing your message, and that's the part that is very often skipped because you just don't have time for it. But it would be really, really good to have another pair of the eyes, have a look into everything. If like if it still makes sense, if there are not and I'm not even mentioning typos, but in general, like you have, after all those changes, it still does what it should be doing. You might also have someone from the audience part to help you, like see if that message works well. And yeah, and then you have approvals, then you have publishing, and then you have gathering feedback. Yeah, so that's what I include. And I don't include the full measurement, because that's another art, right? To get all the stats and so on, but to really understand if it landed well, if it was clear, if it doesn't require any additional, like hopefully not, explanation, so that you have to add something more because like people got a couple of points totally differently, right? So that's what I include into execution.
I think a lot of communicators obviously miss out on this aspect, because, I mean, like you described, there are so many different elements, design, publishing, testing, which you mentioned. I think that's sometimes often missed. So if I were to ask you, from a communication standpoint, what is your advice for communicators so that they can avoid mistakes when they execute?
Well, one of the things would be to work with a plan so that it's realistic. So like it's really nice and inspiring to work, like thinking that only the sky is the limit, but then the execution comes and you might find out that, well, you didn't take into account the right resources. So that's what you have to take, like what's really realistically at your disposal. What might be even more important is relationships with your stakeholders and people that work with you, like graphic designers or any like IT facilities, any like tech side and so on, because that has a very big impact on how smoothly you can work on the execution. Well, you're not a lonely island, right? You have people around you, and even if you are a lonely island, you also have to really know what you're working with so that it goes well. And yeah, we talked about like adjusting the plan, about like not sticking to it but being flexible, having there, like once you have the initial plan, already thinking of a couple of doors that you could like keep open in case something changes. Okay, this is the point where like you already have in mind this or that, right? So that really helps to think in advance of possible variations. And well, yeah, treat your plan as a direction. That's like a guidance, like on how to gather input, how to orchestrate all the elements. It's a guidance, it's not an instruction. I also think that well, practice, gathering experience, that helps, and lessons learned. One of the very unpleasant things that might happen to you is if you repeat your own mistakes and you see that, okay, oh well, again that same thing happened, right? Just sit there and think why it happened. Maybe it's something you can avoid quite easily then. Yeah, we talked about getting to know your stakeholders, their personal preferences, their communication style, so that like really when the time comes, you can work together effectively. um, then from other things, I guess, yeah, we often underestimate the real workload that is behind things. We think like, oh yeah, I'll just sit there, like write it quickly and so on. Yeah, but like you have ad hoc thing here, ad hoc thing there. It's like really hard to focus for like 2 hours in a row, and you're not able to do the same thing if you spread those 2 hours across 2 days, 10 minutes here and there. So we might underestimate our own workload, but we might not know how much time it really takes to our, like cooperators, let's say, people who support us. Like, let's come back to those graphic designers, right? If you understand how they work and what they really need, then you can give them the information in the right format so that it's easier for them to work with it. And also you understand how much time they really need. Like it may seem that you just want to change the color of something, but if it impacts so many other things that you don't understand, you will not know that that person needs more time, to work with something. So yeah, that I think that's a lot in it, getting to know the people, getting to know the tools, and understanding the workload and the processes.
Very nice. In fact, I mean, what I took away was, having a plan B is important. So you can always,
Mm-hmm.
switch, and also introspecting, like you said, you made a mistake last time. How do you not repeat it again? So I think those are interesting aspects which I took away personally. So as we wrap up, Diana, I just want to ask you, what is your advice for communicators when they think of messages? And I think what you are talking about all this time is about program management, because I think,
Mm-hmm.
holding a plan means you need to be very strong in program management. Is that right according to you?
Uh, I think so. Like I would say the key thing is to have everything under control, but at the same time letting it go. So this is like you manage everything around, you manage yourself in the whole situation. And I would say that the very helpful thing is that if you're patient, if you don't take everything personally, if you don't allow yourself to get frustrated easily, then it will be much easier, because it is a demanding work. Like it is, you want to get a result, what result would be good, and everything everything stands in your way. So you have to be able to work with it and just overcome those obstacles and change them in a way, like in your favor, that okay, like if we can't go this way, then we'll go there, we'll do it in that way, and that will work as well. So having this kind of an approach in mind. And you also asked about working with the message specifically. So here I think that a very, very helpful skill is the ability to adjust the message to different channels. So practicing that one, like I've seen people who are brilliant writers when you want an article, but if they're supposed to find the real key message and put it, for instance, on the screens in the office, in the corridor, they have no idea how to do this. So you have to challenge yourself to write different things, to formulate the same ideas in different ways, in different words. And I guess, like the problem might be going both ways. So there are people who prefer to write everything in bullet points, and then you have to change it in sentences, right? So that's another thing. So I would say that on this side, this is one of the best things to practice, and that then everything goes much, much quicker.
Fantastic. Brilliant, Diana. I think this is brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think these are great insights, and I'm sure our audience will love it. So thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to listening also to your other interviews so that I can learn from your guests.
Fantastic.
Thank you.